Welcome. We're looking at Genesis chapter 24, and that's where we meet Rebekah, the next mother of the promise. And it's interesting, this is the longest chapter in Genesis. And when I was training to be a pastor in our little introduction to the Bible, this chapter, I've just got a little tiny note in my Bible, a romance. But it's not simply a romance. This is about the major promises given to Abraham and Sarah and how they're continuing. Let's explore. Finding the right wife for Isaac is absolutely vital for Abraham. In the previous chapter, Sarah has died. She's been buried. Abraham's getting older. Isaac's growing up. For those promises that God gave Abraham and Sarah, the promises of land, children, and a blessing for the whole earth, those promises are quite practical, and obviously for them to continue, Isaac needs a wife who will bear him the promised child, the next promised child. So this is about very important God matters. And Abraham sends his most important person, the equivalent of his CEO. It's probably that Eliezer of Damascus who we met chapters ago, the one who would have inherited if Abraham had none of his own children. He's a significant man. Remember, a few chapters ago, Abraham could muster a force of 318 fighting men, and they pursued those armies that had captured Lot. So if there's 318 fighting men in Abraham's organisation, there's got to be way more than 1,000 by the time you add older people, wives, children, young people. So he sends his most important, his most trusted man, and he makes him swear an oath. And Isaac is not to return to where Abraham and Sarah started from. The hope is that the wife will be from family, but Isaac is not to go back. And before we explore that, let's just look at that going back. Now, both Abraham and Eliezer are absolutely certain that God will provide. If God's made these promises that there would be a child, and this child, Isaac, would grow into a great nation and the whole world would be blessed through him, obviously God's going to back that up by providing the suitable wife and partner. And the fact that Abraham makes Eliezer swear an oath to carry out this task, that's an expression of faith and trust in God. Earlier in Genesis, we've seen God swear an oath. After the flood, when he smelled the sacrifice that Noah had made, God swore an oath never again to destroy all life on earth. God made a commitment to stay with us, even in our sin and our wrongfulness, to stay with us and to work with us in a good way. And we explored that sacrifice of Isaac that God asked as a test for Abraham. And we saw how God was so overwhelmed by Abraham's absolute faith and trust that God swears an oath again to be true to Abraham and to carry out what he's promised. So oaths here are an expression of faith and trust. And when the CEO, Eliezer, gets to the town where Abraham's family had come from, he prays a very precise prayer. You know, if the right woman comes out and she says, yeah, I'll give you a drink and I'll let me water your camels as well, he prays it very precisely. He trusts in the God of Abraham, and there's a strong sense that God's with us, this is all going to work out. And so he's quite comfortable praying that very precise prayer. Now let's turn our attention to Rebekah. What do we notice about her from the text? Well, she comes out in the late afternoon. She goes to the well with others. And from this interaction, so she's interacting with an unknown male. But it's a public place and it's not an inappropriate request. So she's obviously secure in herself and she's confident. And she's assessed the situation. She checks him out. Okay, whole mob of camels. He's obviously well off or works for someone very well off. He's dressed well. The camels are not poor camels. They're in good condition, and from their harnesses and everything else and their saddles or whatever, saddlebags, you can say, okay, there's some wealth here. And obviously he doesn't come across as creepy or whatever else. She's happy to accept his request for, could she give him a drink of water? So there's kindness to her, as well as this self-assurance and confidence and ability to assess. Not only that, but the kindness extends to the animals. She obviously knows stock, and she sees, okay, camels, they've been traveling all day, they'll need water. And I checked up, what might a camel use? And it's at least 80 litres. So she is offering to pour at least 800 litres of water into the trough for 10 thirsty camels. And it's not like she's got a lightweight plastic 10-litre bucket that she's just going backwards and forwards. She'll have a heavy clay pot that weighs a couple of kilos already, and you add a few kilos of water. She's committed herself to a very solid task, and the text said she did it quickly. So she's physically strong, and she's a great worker. She's no delicate little flower. And also beautiful. And just the way she's dressed, she's obviously unmarried and eligible for a good marriage. She's not someone who has to live in shame or anything. So the CEO offers her a marriage contract, and I assume that's what the nose ring and the heavy gold bangles are about. And then, and I'm not sure the exact order of things, whether he offers a marriage and then he gets down and prays, or whether it happens the other way around once he finds out who she is, but he actually gets down, kneels with his forehead right down to the ground and prays aloud to the God of Abraham and Sarah. And Rebekah's listening in and watching. And when she hears the prayer, she recognizes, this is a God moment. And there's offers and choices that I can make here that I'm invited to make. And she says yes to the offer. She'd have heard of Abraham and Sarah. She knows the story will have been passed back along the trading routes, how they had a child in their old age, how this child is the child of the promise. And so she says yes to being part of that promise. And then she runs home and tells her mother. You can imagine the kerfuffle at home. She comes back, she's got the nose ring, she's got the bangles. She's accepted a contract for marriage. Well, she walked out to the well, comes back 2 hours later, and she's committed to be married. So Big Brother has to come and check it all out, and Eliezer and the 10 camels and all the other servants come home, they're fed, they're looked after. Obviously, they're a well-off household, and he wants to leave the very next day. They try to put him off, and she says yes. She is so ready for this adventure. Who are the competent, amazing young women that you've known in your life. Just take a moment to think about them and maybe give thanks to God for them. And perhaps that was you in your younger days, or maybe they're the daughters or granddaughters that you've helped raise or see grow up. What do we make of this? How does it apply to us? Well, there's a romance here, but there's also God deeply and powerfully at work. And God says to each one of us, I want you. Not to use you or mistreat you or anything. I want you. I love you. And in baptism, we can say we're brought into God's family and we all carry the promise that God goes with us and God works through us and that our lives have integrity, our lives have meaning, and our lives have purpose. And that's what Rebekah is about to step into, a whole new life of meaning and purpose in God's care and as part of God's plans. Then we go on, and it's a long chapter, and it's interesting how things are retold, emphasizing that precise way that God's at work. Finally, we come to the end of the chapter, and there's Isaac. And I was wondering, is he a bit of a lost soul? So his mum's died, and when you have a late child, sometimes there's a very close bond between the mother and the child born who's seen his mum grow old. So he's wandering around. And he's visited the well of the living God who sees me. And that goes back to before Isaac was born, when Hagar got pregnant with Ishmael, and then Sarah starts to harass her when Hagar gets full of, look at me, I got pregnant, you can't. Hagar runs away. Remember, she's had her own personal trauma as a slave. She runs away, she's given up, and she's lying beside this well, and she receives an angel from God. And by the end of that conversation, she has given God her own special name, the living God who sees me, who sees my pain, who sees my distress, and is going to go with me and bless me. And that well was named by the community, or maybe by her, the well of the living God who sees me. Interesting. Isaac's gone to visit that. Maybe he's looking for God to touch him in his pain of having lost his mum and not being sure how things are going to work out. And now we come to a very fun moment. Well, before we come to the fun moment, it just says he's doing a reflective walk at the end of the day. As Christians, we'd say, right, so maybe he's praying or reflecting on God's word. And that's all good and proper. There are other ways in which we are simply invited to be reflective or contemplative, simply going for a walk with or without a dog, looking back on the day, looking for moments of, oh, that was important, well, that was good, or, oh. Maybe he's ruminating on things, and we can ruminate in unhelpful ways, just going over and over past stuff, but there's also very helpful ways to ruminate where we realise, oh, I worried about that, or I'm worrying about that, and I haven't invited you into that, God. Can you help me just to release a little tiny bit of my maybe desperate hold on that, or my anxiety, or my fear? So he's doing this reflective walk at the end of the day. Now, if this was a big romance film, he would be all clean and washed, and maybe he's going with his shirt or his robe half open, this beautiful strong muscular chest. Anyway, what happens? The instant Rebekah glimpses him, the Hebrew says, and the English don't translate it this way, the Hebrew says she fell off her camel. She fell off her camel at the first sight of him. So this remarkable, confident, amazing young woman who is quite sure of herself suddenly has an awkward, embarrassing moment, and she falls off her camel. I don't know what that's about, but maybe you can think of awkward, embarrassing moments that you've had on dates or when you were wanting to go out with someone. She falls off her camel, And then she puts her veil on when she finds out this is the man she's going to marry. And probably we're meant to see that as modesty, but maybe it's just embarrassment. Oh dear, I feel so... Ugh. It ends up happily. They're married. She gets to live in the tent of Sarah. She's the new matriarch of this major clan. She's a new mother, or hopefully the mother-to-be, who will bear the next promised child. And it says Isaac loved her. And this is the first mention in the Bible of love within a marriage relationship. There's been plenty of children born and plenty of caring, hopefully, but this is the first mention of love in the marriage. Isaac and Rebekah, more than just a romance, God clearly and powerfully at work honouring promises, God connecting people who need to be joined, and God opening up the way for his blessing for the whole earth. You're part of that blessing through Christ, and you also are called to be a blessing to others. So, go in peace.